So I'm Mariam. I was born and grew up in Armenia until I was 10. So my background is a bit weird in that it's 6 years of academia, but geared towards business. So I studied consumer psychology and what motivates humans generally to do what they do, but also specifically consumers and the purchasing decisions they make and why. So when I left Stanford with the master's, I went into a startup. So today, as I'm telling you guys about customer discovery, I'll actually, over time, throughout the presentation, tell you about the story of the first startup I joined. So since then, that product has shipped. So it's a success story. So you'll get to hear the pivots and the turns we took to get there. And since then, I've been teaching and consulting. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the GovTech accelerator that UNDP did before you guys. So I was a part of that one and I was teaching. And now I'm also consulting startups at various stages of product development or after launch and trying to diagnose, what is a problem with user engagement? What's going on? Should we have even built this in the first place? So those are the types of questions I answer. I want this to be interactive. I don't know what your other sessions have been. If you want to ask a question, please jump in. You're not interrupting. As Haita said, I'll give you resources at the end of this to help you guide and do the assignment. And then 2 people who turn it in early will get my feedback on the assignment, and then I'll use their example next time. So you're incentivized to listen, pay attention. And if you personally want feedback, then turn in the assignment soon.
Great motivation, in fact, Mariam.
Yeah. If you want my personal feedback, I'm gonna over Google Docs share, and later on we'll present to the team and we'll discuss.
Mariam, we will open a separate Slack channel for you and the group, and then we can track the first 2 for them to receive feedback from you directly. Thank you very much.
Thanks, of course. Okay. Cool. So let's get started. Do I have screen sharing permission?
Yeah. Please check.
There we go. Do you guys see it?
Yes, Mariam, we can see it.
Okay. If I do present, what happens is your heads go away, but that's fine. Okay. Awesome. So here we are. We'll be talking about customer discovery, and really today you guys will be doing the how, right, as your homework assignment. But today I hope to imprint upon you the why you should be doing it. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So I love starting some of my talks with quotes, of course, because people believe other people if they're famous. So I'll start with Steve Jobs here. So Steve said, one of the things I've found is that you've got to start with the customer experience and then work backwards to technology. I think you all love Apple products, particularly because of this, right? The users have always been front and center. Apple's user design, UX design, and just general customer centric design has been at the core of that product from the beginning. So you can imagine that the founders sort of go in with this ethos in mind. But the problem is that 42% of startups report failing because of product market fit. So they're not doing what Steve Jobs recommended, right? Of all the reasons startups could be failing, the most popular one that's listed is because of a lack of product market fit. So especially at the stage you guys are, earlier stages, this is the scariest message to know, but this would also be the one that enables you and empowers you to act, because if you can ensure product market fit, that is setting you up for success. So today we'll talk about that process. So here's where you want to land, is the tiny little spot in the middle, which is, do I have a product that is desirable? Is there a problem that it's solving? Do people really, really need it? It could be a vitamin, right? I'm not talking about just painkillers, but is it still solving a problem? Is it desirable? But what we end up doing usually is just focusing on the blue bubble here, which is, can we build this? Does this solution work? Every founder is an inventor at some capacity and just jumps in thinking about that solution, right? But we want to make sure we anchor it in the problem first. And then, of course, the numbers have to add up. It has to be viable. You need a revenue stream, right? So these are the things you're balancing. So here's what we were doing at NeoSensory. So that was the company I was working at. They spent about $2 million on R&D for a proof of concept of a product. You heard exactly what I'm saying. They just jumped in and started prototyping and spent $2 million just working on what I just said is the solution piece. Can we build this? By the time I joined, that was still the question we were asking and not other questions. So just a brief background, the product took in sounds from the environment through microphones and then translated that sound into patterns of vibrations. So you were wearing this vest, and then front and back of your body had these motors, and every time, let's say, someone was knocking, you were feeling a corresponding vibration. You might be asking, great, why are you telling me about the technology? Who is it for? What is it doing? And those are exactly the right questions to be asking, right? So initially, we thought that it was for people who are deaf and hard of hearing, and the use case was to help them understand language. So as we go through the presentation, you'll realize that that is not exactly what happened. So here's a participant, for example. The guy on the left is deaf. The guy on the right is saying a word. Obviously, the deaf guy cannot hear it, but because of the pattern of vibration, he's identifying the word, right? So this is early proof of concept stuff. But I'll tell you what happens later. So stay tuned. I will not spoil the surprise. So customer development. You'd be surprised that many people do not know the definition of a startup. I didn't until after I joined the startup and someone gave me this book. If there's one book you should read, don't read the Lean Startup, read the one that came before it. So Steve Blank was Eric Ries's mentor, actually. And The 4 Steps to the Epiphany is one of my all-time recommended books for any entrepreneur. So what is a startup? It's a temporary organization. Like, people forget that word. It's used to search for a repeatable and scalable business model, right? And the systematic way to go about doing this is the customer development process. So this is a way for you to quickly iterate and test each element of your business model. I know you guys have had some context to this, so I won't go into too much detail. I just want to set the stage. We'll be in the customer discovery phase most of the time, right? So that's what we're focusing out of the 4. But essentially, think of it like this. First, you're searching. You're searching for this fit. You have an MVP. You're proposing different ways of reaching the people you're hypothesizing. You're testing your business model. You're testing your sales and marketing. So like the first entire process is the search iterative process. And if you hit a roadblock somewhere, that's when you pivot, right? The next phase, they will be on the discovery. The next phase is the execution, which is much further down the road. And I'll just have this slide for you guys as reference, but we won't get into it. Okay, let's break it down. So I said today we're focusing on discovery. So this is the very first chunk, right? And what most people do, right, if you have the solution, even if you were doing discovery, the way people go about it is that they get out there and they test the product. So they jump right in and they're like, I've developed this beautiful thing, or I have this software that I want you to test, and here you go. They put it in front of you and they're like, do you like it? Obviously, humans are inclined to answer and say yes, right? So we have to be very careful about the way we're doing the research. We'll get to that a bit later. But honestly, we shouldn't be just going in and testing the product first. The very, very first thing we should be testing is actually our hypothesis around the problem, right? And this is, hey, do deaf people really want to understand? I'm sorry, that's my cat. Sorry. So do deaf people really want to understand speech is the hypothesis that we had, right? We thought that the answer is yes, but it turned out not to be true. Right? So that's the mindset. You're going in with the problem. Do these people want me to fix this for them? Once you've validated and tested the problem, you can put a concept or a prototype in front of a user. Hopefully you haven't built out the whole thing by that time, right? You're doing discovery before you ship. That is the ideal situation. And then there's this good process. So today I'll very briefly, what are the different pieces of the hypotheses discovery interview phase. So this is going to be your assignment. Hi, Goris. So I brought a kitty from Armenia. She's the loud one you're hearing. This is all broken down into much smaller segments, but really the discovery interview is what you guys will be working on as an assignment. So keep that logic in mind. The testing the product piece is really where user research methods come in. So this can involve doing surveys with them. It could involve usability testing. It could involve focus groups, more one-on-one interviews. So it takes a variety of forms, but the product testing section, she'll say hi and then hopefully calm down. So the product testing section is the user research component. And that verified check mark that I mentioned, that's an iterative process, right? So if you go about this whole thing and you realize that maybe you haven't hit the jackpot, you have to go back. Don't stay committed to something that's not working, right? It's very hard to kill off a project. It feels like you're abandoning one of your babies, but honestly, you're better off. For example, at NeoSensory, we wasted $2 million before pivoting. So the lean business canvas, I think one of the guys has already given you a lecture on parts of this. So I'm not going to go too in depth, but there's a couple of quadrants that I'm going to go into depth. I'm not sure what software you guys are using, but Asha's tool is my favorite because you can keep a track of your lean canvas. So it electronically saves different versions of it over time because it will change, right? So you can create a free account and use this tool. It's the one I recommend. So here's the layout of the canvas. You see the giant numbers. There's some controversy around what pattern you should fill it out in and what the right numbers are. Honestly, it could be moved around a decent amount. There is no perfect right or wrong answer. Ash himself says that, you know, he's moved around the numbers a bunch of times. The goal is to just imagine the whole canvas is representing market variables near the right and product variables near the left. And the goal is that for those two things to talk to each other, right? So if you're saying here is my hypothesized market, here are my customers, then the problem should be meeting that need. So that's what I mean by sort of folding it in half. The two buckets that we will be focusing on the most is really, let's identify who our early adopters are, who our customers are. Once we have that hypothesis, we jump to the problem. What are their problems? So here are the people, what are their problems? Then you jump to value proposition. Like, what are you offering them? People often just like straight up want to start talking about features and little things. But besides the features of your product, you know, before you get to features, these features are meant to accomplish something. They're meant to give some kind of value. What is that value? And that discovery is essentially to validate the value that you're hypothesizing to provide. So I'll break down some of this. So with the customer segments, it's also very important not to do these large swaths of people. I'm not sure if you guys have had enough exposure to the word personas, but personas are essentially representative clusters of potential users, right? So for NeoSensory, for example, we had people who became deaf much later in life. Imagine your grandma and grandpa who ask you what a million times. So that's one persona. But then there are also people who were born deaf and they had very different needs. They had very different use cases. We could reach them in very different channels. So keep in mind that a customer is not unified into one group, right? You have different types of customers and different types of groups, and they're known as personas. So one other really important thing to keep in mind, which I think is a nuance that people forget, is that customers are not always users, right? So who's paying for the technology, who's paying for your product might not be the person who cares to use it, who's the end user. So if you're, especially if it's SaaS, for example, for enterprise, you're convincing one person, be it the IT manager or marketing person, whoever, you're convincing someone in the organization to purchase this, but your end users are the employees, right? So when you're doing customer discovery research, you shouldn't just go to your customers, you should also go to your end users. But the point is, if you know you're not selling directly to your end users, then you also need to understand the customer you're selling to. So you need to do a little bit of both. So when people talk about personas, just like what I mentioned now, putting them into groups, you have to also separate them by whether they're the customer and they might not be a user, or they're the user. There are obviously most situations the customer is the user, but there's a lot of nuance, right? So early adopters, by the way, aren't just people who are early adopters of tech in general. Those are the people who have the most severe pain. Those are the people who really, really need you, and who go out on a limb and use your product when it's in a prototype stage, etc. So our early users at NeoSensory, who were helping us beta test, were wearing these products that had wires coming out of them. Like it looked like it was gonna electrocute you, but they didn't care. They had the need so much that they wanted to still test this new technology. Right, so that's the kind of early adopter I'm talking about. So the problem, you can go on a long list of all the problems you're solving, and it's likely you will be solving more than 1 to 3 problems, but you really want to just focus on the top problems. And part of customer discovery is actually to validate the severity of problems. So you'll see that I'll introduce some methods for you guys to quantify some of these qualitative questions. Let's say here's a pain point. Here's, I'm struggling when I go to Starbucks to order coffee and I can't speak, right? That's one sort of scenario you can imagine. But what is really the pain point under there is that I'm having a hard time communicating. So even before going to conduct user research, these customer discovery interviews before the product are really focused on understanding the whys. So the 5 why technique, I'll mention a bit more. So you're looking for frustrations, you're looking for problems and things to fix. So think of it like a therapist mindset, right? The other thing is existing alternatives give you insight about that person's potential pain points, because these are solutions they've gone to before to scratch that itch, right? So you know that there's something going on there. So you're trying to understand, are you covering the same bases? And if they're different, what different pain point are you solving? Usually when people are thinking about the competition, they're like, what other feature do they have that I don't have? This isn't about the feature competition arms race, right? Put that aside, understand, maybe they're solving pain points that your customers don't care about. Right? You don't have to necessarily build that feature if that is not a pain your customers have. So your UVPs, your unique value proposition. Avoid the jargony words. This is the easiest, best, fastest, things like that, right? You want to actually communicate the real value at the end for your user. So they should imagine, what am I going to feel like once I have used your product? So you're thinking in terms of the finished story. You're not talking about features. This isn't saying, okay, I'm gonna enable you to do XYZ using these set of features. Right? This is, once you have done XYZ, here's what you will expect. You'll be happier, wealthier, what have you. So the value proposition we were offering people at the beginning of NeoSensory was, you'll be able to understand speech and the people around you. You'll feel connected to the people around you because you'll be able to understand them. The solution obviously is now where you get to list all your beautiful features. When I approach a founder and I ask them, what do you do? This is what they talk to me about. But you saw how many other steps we took to get here, right? So your solution and your combination of features are not the priority here. The priority is understanding the customers, the need, and validating those two. An unfair advantage. I think one of my really sort of favorite things about this is that it reminds people that the first movers don't necessarily have an advantage. They actually have a burden of learning and creating a new market category, or just learning to market a new product. So a lot of times the fast followers or second mouse to the cheese actually works well. So When you're out there thinking, great, it's an advantage I'm the first, actually sometimes it's a disadvantage that you're the first. So you have to be mindful of what that means. Other competitive advantages could be access to data. It could be having a famous person on the team who's a thought leader, etc. It could be a lot of different things. Essentially, it's something that your competitors can't copycat, right? It's something unique that you have. Let's say you have access to a certain data set that they don't have access to. That is going to enable you to succeed. It is unfair that you have that advantage. You're looking for as many unfair advantages as you can accumulate. For example, that's why people will file patents, right? Because your IP is an unfair advantage. Like someone can't take that away from you. I mean, let's not get into patent law. They can, but sure. So for channels, I won't go too much into this. But I think one of the guys mentioned you might want a bit of a refresher on this. This is how am I going to reach this person? And sometimes founders will have built a product and it's sitting on their desk and then they're like, okay, so how do I find my users now? They start thinking about the marketing once the product is finished. Honestly, you should be thinking about the marketing from day one. How am I going to reach these people? Do I have the means to reach them? Right, for NeoSensory, most of the people with hearing loss are above the age of 65. As a startup, our marketing was said to be digital marketing. These people, I mean, they're on Facebook now to a certain extent, but they're not out there buying technology online most of the time, and they're definitely not clicking on tech ads, right? So we had to, from day one, think about how can we, and can we even afford to market in more traditional ways like TV or print whenever we're a small startup? The answer was no. So we had to then look for organizations and different ways of partnerships and to be able to reach the older demographic. So don't wait until the problem is there once you've built a product. Identify the channels early on. And I actually, when we talk about recruitment for your interviews, you're channel testing during the recruitment process. For you to be able to reach someone to interview about your product who could be a potential customer down the road means that you have to reach them somehow, right? So actually, if you're going to sell something over digital marketing, over Facebook, go and create a Facebook ad to recruit your user interviews. I know that sounds like a lot right now, but you know, even if it's $100 ad money spent to target one interview person, you're getting a lot of value by having tried different ways of reaching that person and failed. And that is early learning that's important for you. So just keep this in mind, that it's never too early to start on marketing. Revenue stream, I won't go into, but you know, make sure your pricing model works and all that good stuff. Cost structures, I think you guys are sort of blessed in Armenia with having much less burn rate than, you know, 2 million just for R&D. So I think you guys are good on that. And your key metrics of success, it could be at the micro level, like what does success look like for user experience? What does success look like for the next 3 years? Or at a much macro level, like how much good am I doing for society, for example. Okay, we are at the really core piece of what I wanted to teach you guys today, which is discovery research process. Who should be doing this discovery research? No one's been asking a question, so I'm going to make you guys unmute yourself and answer.
The founder?
Product managers, founders.
Yes, yes, yes. Who has clued you into this? Everyone should be doing the research, but most importantly, the founders should be doing this research, right? Because you have all the power, you know the product. If someone tells you something on the spot, you can change your story and see if they buy that new story, right? You're iterating, you're pivoting in the middle of an interview. Nobody has that flexibility or that ability as well as you do. So when people, what NeoSensory did was for 2 years, they did not do any interviews and they hired me as a user researcher and they put me in the field and they said, okay, go figure it out, right? So I was a junior researcher. You don't want to be in that situation. Not many people will come back with fruitful answers for you. and not many people will feel that they have the sense of agency over product strategy to really push something. So I was blessed in the sense that as employee 7, I did have a lot of agency. I did dictate product strategy. But really, it took me almost 2 years to get the founders in the field. And after a couple of user meetings, they spoke about these people with their first names. They had these stories in their mind, right? We went to a restaurant with our CEO and a deaf user, and he got to see what it's like to be in a really crowded, overwhelming environment and have our technology just buzz away and not be useful, right? I can go back and I can say, this is vibrating too much, people don't understand what's going on, it's not useful. But it's very hard, especially for a founder, to hear bad news like that. So it's important for them to actually be out there in the field, to see the product in action, but also particularly in the discovery phase. So second, it's anyone who can change your product. So these are the rest of your executive teams. These are your POs, your product officers, your head of product, whatever you call them. And then lastly, honestly, everyone should get involved. That engineer who's too shy to leave their desk should at some point get some exposure to one of your users. Because it is one of the fundamental ways of building empathy, is that people do need to see and be there and witness it firsthand. There's only so much that someone can communicate with quotes. Sometimes I would record interviews and share that, but once the person goes out there and interacts with someone and also sees that their work has meaning and value, the morale of the company really goes up. Everyone just cares more, you guys. So don't hold on to your users like this treasured thing that only the chief executive officers can talk to. Like, enable the rest of your team to have access to them, because you will reap the benefits. They'll have greater empathy and they'll have greater understanding. And once people have a sense of meaning in the work they do, they want to do it intrinsically, right? You're not the one breathing down their neck. They're motivated internally. So I can't emphasize this enough. When should you be doing this research? I think this one I'll jump right in and answer myself. Always you should be doing this research. Honestly, the best buck for your, the best value for your money is to do it before you build something, right? It doesn't cost you anything besides your time to go talk to people. And that time will be much more valuable having spent before building something, having invested resources, whether it's a side business for you while you're still employed, or whether you've dumped all your savings into this. Don't do that. Like, try to actually go into the field first. Some people will tell me, oh, I need an idea first. I need an idea first. Actually, there's great examples of product people who founded companies by just knowing the industry they wanted to be in. So I'll share an article with you guys. This guy who just knew he wanted to be in healthcare. He was an ex-Googler. So he'd seen how products are built and he knew the process, and he was like, I just know I want to be in healthcare. So he went to a hospital and he spent, I think, a couple of weeks there and just observing. Because if you look around, you'll see what people need. You'll see what they're struggling with. You'll see what little things they've created their own hacks for, how they're solving a problem by putting a Band-Aid on something, quite literally. So you can just observationally, the way an anthropologist would go and study a new culture they don't know. Sort of observationally, you can go into your natural habitat of your user and hang out there and watch and be on fly on the wall. You could just observe at first. Then you get to the next stage of contextual inquiry where you can observe and interview them. So before you build is my highly recommended piece. So at NeoSensory, they brought me on while we were building. And as soon as I got there, we did start testing MVPs in the sense of we were testing prototypes that had wires sticking out of them. And sometimes by the end of my meeting and on my drive home, I would get a text message from the user saying the prototype broke, right? But it's fine. We did not wait until the prototypes weren't breaking to send it out in the field. As soon as one of them was built, as soon as we had something, even if we had to tape over it and send them Velcro, we did that. So this is what I mean by MVP. It really has to be the minimum viable product that delivers your value proposition. It doesn't need to have all the features, right? That's exactly the whole point. Your solution might be loaded with more features in the end, but you just need the basic features to carry the value and give that to the user. And you're not done once you have launched a product, because that whole thing before launch was all hypotheses. Hypothesis is just a fancy word for a guess. It's a guess you had based on some research that you did. But the truth is, once the product is out there in the wild, you might learn that you weren't so correct, that the 5 people you reached and talked to and loved your product, that you actually have a hard time reaching 5 more people like them. Or so that means there was something wrong with your marketing hypotheses or your channel hypotheses, or they don't have the problem as severely as you thought they did, so they won't spend that kind of money to solve that problem, right? So everything you do pre-launch is setting you up for success, but after launch, it's being tested again. And you're also not done after one successful release of a product. Consumers, like habitually we're used to, keep wanting more and more and more and better, right? So you have to iterate and improve. So the research continues after launch as well. Let's see, give me a sec. Okay, so what type of questions do quantitative versus qualitative research methods answer? And here is when we start looking at the landscape. And you guys will have these resources, these slides, so don't worry about going too crazy with taking notes on these methods. For example, I'm about to introduce in a second, but let's see the lay of the land. So on the bottom, we have the qualitative. So on the left side, we have the qualitative. On the right side, we have the quantitative. But we also have what people say, what their attitudes are versus what they do. And we all know that from personal experience. What people say and what they do don't always match. So putting aside the people in your personal life, this is very true for customers as well, right? And those types of questions are also differently answered based on the methods, in the sense that the qualitative questions are really getting at, why is this a problem? How can I fix it? It's getting at the core of what's going on, the why is this happening? On the quantitative side, we're just looking at numbers and more indirect pieces of information. You're assessing how much or how many, right? You're quantifying something. So these things come together in this landscape that you'll see. The green means, natural use of the product, for example. Triangle means there's not even a product, right? So you could be doing these interviews, which what we're talking about here at the bottom left. And these are qualitative attitudinal interviews, devoid of actually using the product. And all the way over here on the right, you have your A/B testing, which people are familiar with. So I won't go into all of this detail, but I'll say ethnographic field studies are sort of what I was mentioning. Just go and observe, right? If you're going to build a product for a hospital, go and spend time at that hospital. Participatory design is another wonderful one, is if you have users who are patient enough and excited enough, bring them in. And once you've understood their need and all that good stuff, have them also help build the product, participate in the design. So I won't go into a lot of these, but this is a great resource. I hope that you guys do check it out. Generally, this consulting company, I think, has incredible writing on UX and how to do a lot of these research methods. I would say, give me 1 second before I make that conclusion. So just to sum up of what qual and quant are like. So quantitative metrics are telling you what's going on. But you got to talk to people. You can't just track them. You can't just tag a customer at a grocery store and expect to get value out of that, right? You could just talk to the person. Talking to them does not mean building exactly what they say, right? We're looking for the underlying meaning behind what they're saying in terms of communicating the need and the problem that they're facing. So I'll read this actually, and the link here for his name, if you click on Jesse's name, you'll get to the article. But this is huge. So he's a researcher who was at Pepsi and then a consultant at Amazon. So he's done a lot of this research himself. So he talks about why should we be using qualitative or qual methods. So companies talk a big game about how much they care about their customers and their problems, but it's often in the abstract. Qual is a way to float that customer focus up to the surface. It's a tool that allows you to encounter your users in the wild and not just view them through a hypothetical user or an aggregated persona, right? I told you about these personas, but even that is a very generic image. You want to actually be out there talking to people so you have the full picture in your head. So qual is about filling in the blanks. It's exploratory. It's about emotions. And since it seems kind of squishy and hard to scale, it's easier to write off. But startups that do that, and they do it at their own peril. We build better products and solve bigger problems when we keep real people in mind, and you just can't go without it. So if you don't take my word for it, take Justin's word for it. Here's something that I wanted to say. It blows people's minds when I say it, but qualitative data can and sometimes should be coded and turned into quantitative data. So these squishy interviews we're talking about, we will be putting numbers both inside of the interviews and also what we do with the data later, right? So we'll go into how to put it inside of the interviews, but also you can code your qualitative data. So if 50% of your users have mentioned X problem, you've now counted all the users and said 50% have X problem, right? You've just quantified a piece of your qualitative data. So when we go back to this, like, it actually bothers me a little bit when they have this quant and qual, because interviews can have quantitative components, because surveys can have open-ended qualitative questions. So don't be so locked into this grid and thinking that whatever's quant stays its own field, whatever's qual stays its own field. They talk to each other, and you as a researcher, you as a founder, have the flexibility of adding both qualitative and quantitative types of questions inside surveys and interviews. Wonderful. How are we doing on time? Okay, awesome. So let's talk about discovery interviews. So interviews, in this sense, I'm talking about just one-on-one meetings. So it's you and somebody else. If you want to take a note taker, that's wonderful, so you can be more engaged and not taking notes. Don't ever have more than 2 people against 1 person. Don't take your 4 co-founders and go interview someone. It usually puts people in a weird position when it's too many people, quote, against them. You want a one-on-one or a note taker sort of sitting a bit on the side, actually. Like, you want the person to be focused and talking to one other individual. So it's not a group interview. Even if you have the note taker, they're mostly silent. And with the interviews, like I mentioned, you can start as early as you want. You don't have to have a product to do an interview. You don't need an MVP. You could take a concept in your mind and have that be what you test. You can take paper prototypes. You could take a design of something, you CAD it up. Let's say it's a physical thing for agriculture, and you have a CAD up model of it on your computer. That's the MVP you can take to get feedback on. So don't think of interviews as I need to have something tangible to conduct them. This comes way before. So people always ask me, what is a good sample size? And even with the fact that I put 20 to 40 on here, it really depends. If you're targeting your personas well, if you're targeting your customers well, and you're talking to the right kind of people, then you might get away with about 20 people. But if you don't know you're talking to the right people, or if your net is a bit too wide, then you might need to talk to more than 40 people. Generally, you want to talk to at least 5 people who belong in that one persona of yours, whatever that persona may be that you're thinking of. So just keep the number in mind. One really good rule of thumb that I use, that we actually use often at NeoSensory, was once you hit a point where you start predicting what the person is going to answer to your question, you should stop conducting interviews. that means you know so much that you're not getting a lot more value, a lot more new insight. So you start seeing those diminishing returns. Don't spend more time. But obviously, don't go conducting 3 interviews and believe in your head that you have a representative sample, right? So you need a decent chunk. At NeoSensory, we pivoted the entire product, which you still have yet to listen to why, by conducting about 30, I think it's like 35, 36, like less than 37 for sure. I know that is less than that. Interviews, that's it. The entire company, having spent $2 million, changed their direction and started working on something else after talking to about 30-something people. So I hope you're getting the point that this has a lot of value. This changes products. This isn't just one of many lessons you're learning because it's good to do. It's not a nice to have. Most companies fail because they're not doing this, right? So in terms of methods, let's get into that. It's ideal if these interviews are in person. So much of what we communicate is nonverbal. So when you're there and you see when they tense up or when they smile more, when the tone changes, when their body language is more open, you're picking up on so much information in person that I don't know what's going on these days. I don't know if you get to do that. But when you do get to do in-person interviews at a safe social distance, it's ideal to do it in person. Your second best is video, only if for whatever reason they refuse use the phone, but at the very least you want to see the person over video. Look, it costs money and time to do this. You might need to pay people with gift cards to talk to you, which is totally fine. It does not mean their data is biased if you're paying them for their time. It's a small token of your appreciation, so keep that in mind. I actually hear a lot of people say, oh, but I gave them money. They might just be saying things just to get the money, but really people want to be helpful. The problem is people sometimes want to be too helpful, so you have to be careful with the way you're asking the questions and how easy you're making them feel to be able to say negative things to you and not be afraid of hurting your feelings. And honestly, I set the stage at the beginning of my interviews and I say, you can't hurt my feelings. That the best type of advice that we'll get actually is the critical type of feedback. The more you say things are wrong with this, the easier our job is to go back and try to fix them, right? So it's on you as an interviewer to make the person in front of you feel completely safe and that nothing they say is stupid, which is also something else I tell them, is that, you know, there's no right or wrong answers. There's no stupid questions. Just make them feel comfortable enough to open up, keeping in mind that they're human and they don't want to hurt your feelings. So it's important to try to ask questions in a way that elicit stories and pain points that they don't have to sort of talk around and help you when you're talking about your own product, right? That's the other thing. We'll talk about when you bring your own product in, but generally they can't help you when they're talking about need finding if you have kept your own ego and your own product out of it. So that's the goal at the beginning. By the way, when it says resources at the bottom, these are all hyperlinked to different websites you can do more reading on. So this whole time, if any of you guys already have products out there or you're thinking, okay, so she's saying you can do this research at the beginning, in the middle, at the end, what's going on, who am I talking to? So customer discovery is like talking to the potential users, not even someone who's become a new acquired user, right? It's the path before this, is they have the potential to become a user. But user interviews are extremely helpful at other parts of your product development. They look different. The types of questions you're asking are different, but you're still assessing, is my product solving this person's pain, right? So it's going to be similar in that sense and in the purpose. But when we're talking about it, we're really going before all of this. If you do have customers, by the way, and they have left you, they have churned and abandoned, those are the folks you want to talk to most. I know rejection hurts. I know they have left. I know it's very difficult to get their attention and to get them to give you time and talk about it. But the people here in red, the ones who don't like you, have the most to say about improving your product. So don't be afraid of talking to them. Okay, so we keep talking about interviews. How do you know you're talking to the right people, right? So I mentioned you have these hypotheses about who your ideal customers are. At NeoSensory, we went and talked to the older demographics. We went and talked to the people who were born deaf. We realized, oh wow, there's something very different between people who already have hearing aids, so who have technology that amplifies sound so they can hear it. But what happens when they turn it off and they go to bed? Oh wow, interesting, right? So we were able to dissect into different types of groups of people to talk to. And it's important for you to talk to the range of your personas and not just one typical type. It's possible that in your conversations, you'll realize that you need to be going out there and talking to more people because somehow the notions you had about your customer are not the right ones that you're seeing over and over again. So this is iterative, keep that in mind. But you have to be talking to the right people. So it is what it is. Otherwise your data is not helpful and it could actually be misleading. So don't go ask your friend just because you think that they're the right age demographic as someone who's going to use your product. If you're developing something for a farmer, don't go ask grandma who lives in the city, right? So try to understand that you need to go where the people are. So when I train early and young junior researchers, their most problematic thing is they're doing more of the talking than the user is. You should be mostly listening and observing and looking at what's going on, not doing a lot of the talking. So keep that in mind. And you're definitely not pitching. You're not selling. This is not a pitch. It is the opposite of a pitch, because for a pitch, you're out there motivated to show this to you. You are essentially advertising the solution you have. In this case, you want to see what their pain is so you could see if your solution might match that. So if I go and tell you this is incredible, you're likely to say, oh yeah, great, I want it. Yeah, it's great, it's wonderful. But if you ask me if I actually felt the pain to buy it in the first place, that is the more informative question. So when is it okay to bring up your product? In the discovery interview roadmap that we're talking about, at the beginning, when you're just starting the conversation with the person, you're getting to know them. You'll see from the example script, so I'll give you guys a long example script that you can pull questions from. You'll see that it asks things like, tell me about yourself. What are your hobbies? I know people think this sounds silly, but understanding what people's hobbies are, what their habits are, what their day-to-day looks like, what their income might be, what their job might be, these all tell you about that person and their patterns of behavior. And do you fit inside their life, right? They're not just a customer making a purchasing choice about your product. They're a human being with a complicated history and lifestyle, and you want to understand how you fit into there. So at the beginning, do this. The other benefit of just getting to know them and just talking to them is that it puts them at ease. And it takes about 20 minutes to really establish rapport with someone, sort of to realize you're meshing, and to get them to start talking about deeper, more problematic things. So use this opportunity as a warm-up, but also use it to get to know them fundamentally as human beings. The next big chunk is the pain points I've painfully and painstakingly tried to instill upon you by this point. The next is about learning about their alternatives. Don't tell me you're the first one, you're godsend. Like, if this problem exists, they have likely tried solving it on their own, even if there have not been other alternatives, right? So if a farmer has an issue with watering, they might have created their own irrigation system. So people come up with little baby solutions in their own life to problems. And honestly, sometimes they don't even realize that they're compensating and fixing something because it's just their instinct to do it. But that's an opportunity for you to see that one person's instinct can be met and everyone else can also benefit from the solution you're providing. lastly, at the way end, you can introduce your product or your prototype or your concept, whatever it may be. So did you hear that, like, literally most of the interview, the first 40 minutes, let's say, out of a 1 hour interview is spent talking about that person and the situations in which they experience problems and the types of solutions they've sought previously. So I try to get at least 1 hour for an interview. Like I mentioned, it takes about 20 minutes just to warm up and sort of get going and get into the meat of things. So try to get an hour slot with someone and anticipate that less than half of the time is going to be spent talking about your product. This is the discovery phase, right? If you're doing user research later on, you can jump in and talk about your product from the beginning if they're already a user. So let me take a quick break with my grapefruit juice. I've been talking for a while and you guys can check these out. So at the far left, you have one of the earliest prototypes of the NeoSensory product. In the middle, you have the prototype that we had by the time I joined the company. This is what we started sending out to people in testing. And then on the right, you have what we ended up with. And I'll let you think about that evolution for 1 second. So I went from a vest, a suit, to a wristband. What happened? So when I took the prototype out in the field, we realized two really important things. One is nobody wanted to wear that. Nobody wanted a form factor of this tight spandex exercise material with vibrating motors all over your body with chargers next to you. Like, it was just a sci-fi crazy thing. And people were very uncomfortable with the form factor. So switch to a wristband really made sense at that point. The other thing is we realized that people who were deaf, who were using American Sign Language, so they're using their hands to talk, did not want to spend their life trying to understand English, trying to understand us, non-hearing loss individuals, because that was still half the leg of the conversation. Like, no one on our team sat there and realized, okay, so someone who's deaf understands me, but I still can't understand them. So actually the connecting them to people and enabling communication was just bullshit. That didn't happen. That couldn't have happened. We were solving half the leg of the problem. So we realized that very quickly. People who were deaf were very upset by the product we were building, actually. So imagine spending 2 years building something and $2 million building something and having people be upset with you to the extent that I had one person give me the middle finger in the middle of an interview. That is also because culturally people in America who are deaf feel very proud of that, and they don't want to learn another language. English to them is a foreign language. They have a rich language and culture of their own. So they were mad. And we didn't stop because we could have just dropped everything. What we did was actually spend more time with them in the field. So I went to deaf schools. I went to people's houses and I helped them make dinner, and I hung out there and I saw how they interact with their kids. I saw how people switch lights on and off in their house, for example, to get the attention of someone who's deaf. I saw how kids at schools threw stuff at each other to get attention. I was able to see that when a kid is crying, the deaf mom has a really hard time realizing that and what happens. And then on the other side, I saw kids who were laughing and their mom just didn't hear it and missed that opportunity to engage with them. I went into homes of people who were older, who cried and broke down and said that they were afraid of sleeping at night, even when they took their hearing aids off, because the smoke alarm could go off and they wouldn't know that there was a fire in the house. So we're sitting there and everyone's mad at me about the language, but all around me, I'm seeing these different environmental situations where sound is so critical. So what we did was completely pivoted the product. You guys saw from the vest to the wristband, but also from communication and from speech to the environment. So now the wristbands microphones were picking up and giving you patterns that would help you recognize your dog so well that someone who's never heard their dogs could go behind a closed door and tell the difference between their 3 different dogs barking, right? So the bigger dog has different frequency than the little one, the bark is longer, etc. So people got so good that they were able to tell the difference between their different dogs. I saw mothers start crying when their kid could, for the first time, like react to the kid's laughter and sort of share that moment. We take it for granted. These are little human things where someone sneezes in the office. For you to say bless you to your coworker seems like a really small thing, but it's an opportunity for social connection. So the goal of social connection was met through environmental sound awareness, and safety was met, and all these other goals were met. Where are we? No, it's in the end. So yeah, I mean, this is the power of, this is the arc of a story of complete product pivot. And to the extent that now that it's out, we're getting the best, you know, ratings, reviews on Facebook, and comments people are leaving about all the different sounds they're realizing. Like, people forget to turn the faucet off when they're washing their hands or after doing the dishes, and houses get flooded because of that. And this product is now helping prevent situations. So it went from middle fingers to people crying when they put it on. I think that's a pretty big evolution, and thanks to interviews. So when you're taking notes, try to capture things in the exact words the users are using and not your own summary. We're all human. We have tendencies to see things in a biased way, whether we want to or not. And when you write things in the same words as the users, you're removing any bias you will introduce by summarizing, right? If someone says, I love it, oh my God, and you put user likes it, you're missing that whole thing, right? Because someone else who said, oh yeah, I like it, will also be summarized, user likes it. And those two things are very different from each other. One really big conundrum is, should I record this or not? Should I have audio or video recording? It really depends on the type of product you have. I can't say this enough. We realized early on at NeoSensory that it was actually making people pretty uncomfortable to have it recorded. And what would happen is that as soon as I would turn off the recording, people wouldn't want me to leave their house. They would then start talking to me. They would then start crying or being honest. So it was a very emotional product, a very personal thing for them. So actually, in our case, it wasn't working well to record it. So what I would do instead is I would take my computer and I would literally type as fast as I can to capture most of their words. By the end of my time at NeoSensory, people were joking I could be a court reporter and taking notes of literally every single word, essentially. I know it's very difficult to do and it takes time and training. So if you can't record, I would say take your laptop. There are some researchers who are going to be mad at me for saying that, and they say take pen and paper instead, but there's no way that I could be that fast. Pen and paper. The recommendation against taking a laptop is that, like, you're making these clicky sounds. What did I do? You're making these clicky sounds, and that's annoying to people. But I found that to be a much more efficient way to take notes than pen and paper. Honestly, though, if the conversations are okay, if it's not a very emotional product, just have at least the audio recording so that you can later on have a transcript of the interview. So there's all these apps you can use to translate from text to speech, from speech to text, I'm sorry. And I would say get audio. Usually audio is also easier to collect from users because they forget that you're recording, whereas a video camera is like on their face the whole time and they keep remembering that they're being recorded. The risk is that they might not be as honest on the record, officially on the record, but it's an interesting trade-off. So you guys will get a draft of a script, like I mentioned. A script is all the list of the questions that you have going in. You will be tailoring this to your own product. This is just going to be, you know, sample questions. But the thing to keep in mind is you're not rigidly following the script when you're talking to people. Think of it like the ocean waves. You're going with the flow, and you're really there to uncover little pieces of the puzzle. You're there to try to figure stuff out, which means in your questioning, if they say something interesting, it's on you to flip that puzzle piece and try to see what's behind it. So you can and should add questions as you're going through, and it doesn't have to be in the necessary top to bottom order. One of the earliest mistakes I see people make is that they have this robotic, like, I'm going to ask this question, then I'm going to ask that question, then I'm going to ask that question, because that's how they appear on my sheet. And usually junior researchers will do this the most, is that they'll go with the order. The order does not matter. The order is there in the sense that you don't want to talk about your product first. Yes, keep that order. Please keep that order. But the order of the questions to discover the pain point might not necessarily be the flow of the conversation. Sometimes
before moving on, there is one question in the chat. You said you can ask questions like during the presentation. So can you please look at the question in the chat as well? Thank you very much.
Yes. I don't know how to. Let me see. Do you mind reading it? Because I don't.
Of course, yeah. Let me. Hi, Mariam. A quick
Do
question.
you want me to ask?
Yeah. That would be great, actually. Next session, that's better, right. Please.
Mariam, thank you very much. It's a very interesting presentation. I mean, I wanted to ask you whether you think that every product, any product, can be tested via interviews. For instance, there are very innovative products, such as the computer mouse, let's say, which was created, like the first one was a junk. They couldn't do well, and the second one was a little bit more successful. Or Sony Walkman, let's say, that didn't have any precedence. Do you think they could be tested via interviews, or they need an MVP beforehand?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, especially product category creators like NeoSensory, for example, is like that too, right? Like nobody thought of using vibration to translate sounds. So honestly, think of it less like testing the problem. If you remember at the beginning, we talked about testing the problem first and then the product. So the Walkman situation, Sony realized, is this Sony? Right? They must have realized that people want music that is mobile, right? So if you went and interviewed someone who loved music and you talked to them about where they listen to music, where they buy music from, and all this other stuff, and then you would realize from these conversations, I'm assuming that someone would say, hey, when I go hiking, like there's no music. Like music is at home in front of my boombox, right? I don't have music anywhere else. So they don't even have the concept to tell you, I want an iPad or I want a Walkman, whatever, right? So they're just telling you they want music that's mobile. So you're listening to that, and then you're understanding the problem is that we need mobile solutions. We can't just rely on a record player or a boombox. What was the other product you described?
Computer mouse.
The mouse, yeah. So that's interesting. It was the trackpad was before the mouse, or the?
It was after.
After. Yeah. So how were people using computers before? Now I'm sounding
Just
dated.
the keyboard.
Just a keyboard?
Right.
Yeah, I guess maybe people complain about shortcuts being difficult to memorize because no one memorizes them now either, besides Control-Z. So you would have realized people complaining about difficulty of navigating, right? No one was going to tell you, I'm imagining this thing that magically moves around. Like, people can't solutionize for you. So in my script, actually, you guys will have a question that says, if you have a magic wand, and what would you do to solve this problem? And they come up with ideas. They might come up with the product idea that you're probably never going to build. But what you're listening for behind that answer is the pain that they're describing, is the problem that they're having. So if they said, that's just John, like, this is just, it's so hard. Like, I want to go here, but By the time I do the arrows and I get to that field, it's taking a long time. Navigation is taking a long time. Navigation is difficult. It's not precise, or I can't do things like draw, right? Like I think the mouse helped people start doing doodles on the computer. So by listening to the complaints, you're getting ideas about the product, not taking the product out there, because innovation doesn't go in that direction. Sometimes people just sit at home and they have a brilliant idea, and then it turns out that people use that product. But really, like, the kinds of products that are developed come from that. Does that sort of help answer?
Yes. I mean, it has a second part as a question, if you allow me, because I was developing a product. I mean, I was thinking to develop a product. The existing one lacks some elements, which I was doing. I mean, I explored during the customer conversations. I mean, at least 10 elements that the customers need is missing there. They tell me that, I mean, these kind of things would make it easier for them to use it. That's why the existing one doesn't scale, it is not helpful, etc.
Okay.
Do you think having only this kind of conversation is enough to start building the product?
So look, if there are alternatives, that means those guys went before you, right? They're the first movers and they solved a problem. What you're doing here is the second mover advantage, is you're coming in and you're doing their market research for them, right? You're talking about the existing product's problems. So you're essentially, think of it like this: if you were the inventor of that product, you're doing the market research for them. So in your own product discovery, you're using the alternative as a way to build on top of it. So if you're not just saying, hey, they're missing these features, so I'm going to go build these features, if you're understanding exactly what that product is still not providing them, like what is something they're still missing, right, that you're saying, or what is a way that the feature they have provided is not being that efficient. Like they could be doing a better job, right? It doesn't mean that feature doesn't exist. It could already be there. You could just be improving on the implementation, right? Mouses ended up giving people weird hand problems, and then they became more ergonomic. Now people have like those balls they roll around and all this stuff, right? So a mouse has evolved. That means a second person building a product could definitely evolve over the competitor. So going out there and talking about the issues that they have with your competitors' products is a great way to learn.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, honestly, alternative solutions, like I said, whether it's something they've purchased or they came up on their own is really important. Let's do this. Yeah, let's talk more about strategy for conducting the interview. So ask open-ended questions. That means you're asking for like more than a yes or no, right? Not thumbs up. So don't say, you know, do you drink grapefruit juice? Yes or no. Ask me, what juice do you drink? And let me answer and let me talk about it. So the other recommendation is to ask for stories instead of just general statements. So when humans are asked to rely on memory, we have a really bad way of telling things. We missed certain points. Like if I ask you for general statements, you're summarizing, you're introducing a lot of bias. But if I ask you for a specific story, that really sticks. So let me give this example. If you ask me, are you a healthy person? Do you eat healthy? I'll be like, yeah, I eat healthy all the time. I try to eat a Mediterranean diet. But don't ask me that. You can ask me that first, but the real truth is, you know, what did you have for dinner yesterday? I had pasta. Oh, what did you have for lunch? I had pizza. What did you have for breakfast? I didn't have breakfast, right? Now you just saw what my actual habits are, what the real truth is. My general statement could often be this idealized version of myself, or things I want to do, or things the way I envision them. But when you ask for specific stories, that's when you realize the problem. So if I asked, and if you asked me and I said I had the pizza and the pasta and I didn't have breakfast, you know, you're supposed to ask why, right? So if you ask me enough questions, you would probably get at a point where I say, I don't have time. Right? I don't have time to cook something, so I grab something from outside. Or I didn't have time in the morning for breakfast, that's why I didn't eat it. So then you realize I need food, I need meal prep that is easy, or maybe I need my groceries delivered because I don't have the time to go to the store, right? So you realize I want to be healthy, realize the truth is I'm not healthy right now, and the hindrance is the difficulty in cooking or obtaining, and the time is the issue. So whatever your product solution should be, shouldn't be teaching me how to eat healthy things. It's just the problem is that I don't have the time to cook the healthy things, for example. So the meal kits now in the US are very popular, where everything is chopped up for you. The whole recipe is there. You just buy one box and all the ingredients are there. They're exactly for people like that. So I hope that makes sense. Ask for very specific stories. Don't say, okay, tell me about your lifestyle with eating. Like, you can ask that initial open-ended question, but then ask for examples, specific stories. This other one is also very important. You'll often hear people say, will you do this? Don't ask them what they will do in the future. Ask about what they've done in the past and what they're doing now. That is a much, much, much better predictor of behavior than asking about the future. This goes in your personal life as well. Usually the way someone has behaved in the past is how they're going to behave in the future. So don't have crazy expectations of change of people in your life. So don't do that to people you're interviewing, right? They can't predict how they're going to act in the future. The best predictor is the history you already have. So this is one of my favorites, and it's something that if you've ever been in therapy, you'll realize that your therapist is doing this at all times, which is called the echo technique. So when the user is saying something and they kind of trail off, or they're not saying, or they're done with their story, so to speak, all you do is repeat the last couple of words that they've said. So I'll read the example below. So the user is saying, this table is weird, I'm not sure. And then the facilitator or the interviewer is like, not sure what, right? So you're just repeating the last couple of things, or just saying the table is weird, but you're sort of raising your tone at the end to make it seem like it's more of a question, right? So you have this interrogatory tone. You're not being flat voiced, because then you're like, table is weird. No, but you're trying to say it like a question so that it invites them to open up and speak more. And the other really cool technique is just a slight bit of silence. I know we're all very socially uncomfortable with silence, but imagine your worst dates and those social awkwardness. That is okay during a user interview. It is okay to not jump in and ask a follow-up question and just hesitate for a little bit longer, so that that person has the opportunity to keep talking. When they finish and you don't jump in, the user feels, oh shit, I should be saying more, and they go on. So give them that space, and then repeat the last couple of words to encourage them to say more in an interrogative tone. Cool. So in all of this, I know we're talking about alternative solutions and all that, but really you're trying to get at how they feel about those things. How frustrated are you with the existing solution? What pisses you off? What bothers you, right? It's not just the cost of your competitor. There's usually more than just something as superficial as cost. So what are the pain points? What are the emotions? What are the frustrations? And typically you're looking for negative emotions, right? So if everyone's happy and it's great, then you're not out there fixing something. Fixing means something is broken, something is frustrating. And you're trying to understand what and why. So the number of question marks here is not coincidental. It's 5, because this is called the 5 why technique. So I mentioned the eating behavior one. If you ask me why enough times, you would get to the point that I have a time management issue. I'm a busy person, let's say. So when someone says, I don't like this, ask why. And then they're like, because it's too hard. Why is it hard? Right? because I don't have the time. If I keep asking why, you're going to get down to the distilled level. You're going to get to these emotions, right? Like I feel confused, or I'm sad, or I'm angry. So you're really trying to get at the core. We've already talked about alternative solutions a lot, so I won't say it, but I mean, look at just my emojis tell you, right? Electricity has a lot of different alternatives. You can have a flashlight, you can have a candle, you can have battery powered. So you're trying to get the array of self-made and other solutions that they've used. So here's an article from, this is the cover of an article in the Wall Street Journal about NeoSensory. So what we ended up doing is, as a product, we realized that there's 4 different types of value propositions we're providing. One I've mentioned is a safety and security, like the smoke alarm. The other one could be your dog barking or your doorbell, so just general awareness. One that was important to people, but they weren't able to communicate it to us, but we realized during interviews and by spending time with them what was important are these being closer to people around you. If someone calls your name, the vibration for your name actually is unique enough for a lot of people to be able to turn around and see who's calling their name. And we also realized deaf people love music. Like, it's crazy, but they do. They bump up the music so loud, they touch the speakers and they feel the vibration. So they loved our product for music. And that was a value proposition we did not even intend going in, but that came out of our research, right? So be open to discovery, be open to your product fitting into someone's life in a way that you did not imagine. This is what I meant by you can add quantitative questions to an interview, right? So if someone talked about a certain story, let's say that they were frustrated, that someone rang the doorbell and they didn't get the delivery of their product because they didn't hear the doorbell, right? So you can ask on a 1 to 7 scale, how frustrated were you? Someone might say, oh, it's okay, it's a 2. I'll go to the UPS store and I'll grab it myself later, or I'll go to FedEx. Someone might say it's a 7, like I'm very frustrated. I don't have a car to go pick it up. I missed the delivery. I was waiting for that package. So you try to see how severe is the pain. And one really important way to characterize severity in your interviews is to ask for rating scales. So this will be super important. The other question to ask, I'm sure you guys are familiar with this, but just in case I put it out there, is the Net Promoter Score. So the NPS just asks people, what is your likelihood of recommending to a friend, colleague, family, what have you? And it's a 0 to 10. It's always 0 to 10 because there's a specific formula for calculating it. It's the number of people who've given you 9s and 10s, your promoters. These are your ambassadors. They're out there telling others about you. They love you so much. They're advocating, right? These are your promoters. And you subtract the percentage of your detractors, which are the people who don't like you. The people who give you 7 and 8 are passive. That means they're not out there reducing your credibility, but they're also not out there adding to your word of mouth or growth. They're just passive. So you're looking for people who love you, So for the NPS score, it could fall in a range from a -100 to 100. And people always ask, what's a good score? It varies by industry. At NeoSensory, a bunch of our studies were around 69, 70. So we were actually at a really good point. I've consulted companies who were negative in a needs improvement category. So you see the whole range, and I guess it was good that they realized they needed help to fix that. But one really important thing about the NPS is that I started asking this question when people were hearing about the concept. You guys, we were at conferences even before one of the wristband prototypes were available, and we had already gotten the booth, and we went there and we just told people, we're making a wristband that translates sound and it does XYZ. Would you recommend it to a friend? And they were like, why are you asking me this question? But we really still got to see how excited people were by asking this question to gauge, are they so excited that they're going to go tell another deaf person about it or not? So it's never too early to ask. And it's an important thing to keep asking because you get to see trends over time. So once your product is launched, and you get to see what happens when you introduce a new feature, if your score drops, like you did something wrong, it's a good indicator of the health of your product. Why is NPS so important? Because it drives most of your organic growth. 20 to 60% of your organic growth is accounted for by the NPS score. The people who referred by another person are more likely to stay, or the conversion rate is better actually. They tend to also be more loyal customers. And the fact that if you can increase your customer retention, you're reducing user acquisition costs and all these other costs related to marketing, for example. So any increase in acquisition, any increase in retention helps reduce costs and you don't have to acquire new users. So this is a really important score because it gives you an idea of what's going on so that you can work to improve it. The other really important question that I have in all of my interviews and even in surveys that I do is if the person has used it, right? For this one, you need at least an MVP. And it's asking them, how would you feel if you could no longer use this product or service? So it was started by Sean Ellis, who I think is a VC, and they did research saying about, you want to aim for the 40% number. So you want at least 40% of your users to say they would be very disappointed if you no longer existed. So these are people who can't live without you, right? You want people who love you so much they can't live without you. If you ask people that about their iPhone, most people are going to say they would be very disappointed. What we realized at NeoSensory, for example, that people who absolutely loved us were still giving us the somewhat disappointed. And we couldn't figure out why for a long time until we got to the bottom of it. And it was that they had led a life without hearing for so long that they were like, I'm used to it. So although you're wonderful, I know how to survive without you. So I would only be somewhat disappointed. And this was very important for us to understand because we then were able to narrow this down. Codies, don't do it. Sorry, guys. So we were able to narrow this down by persona. Sorry. She's behind my desk acting crazy. Hey, hey. Hayastani Pawat's Nerita Codies. I keep that in mind that this is an intention question. So this is not action, right? But if you're aiming for at least 40% of people saying this, then you can more confidently go about thinking what's going on. So you want to collect a decent number of responses. You can't just go off of like 5 people. So collect as many as you can, obviously. So Sean recommends that you ask this question after the person has experienced your product at least twice, like experience the full product at least twice. But honestly, you can do it with MVPs. And I've asked after someone has used it even once. You can be as conservative as you want, but my advice, I think by now you guys know, collect data, collect it as soon as you can, and collect as much of it as you can. So you can ask now, and then 2 weeks later, if you get to talk to the user again, be like, okay, so now that you've had more experience, has your answer remained or changed, right? So feel free to go back to people. Some of the best experiences are when one of your users at the end tells you that it's okay for you to keep contacting them, because some people become so invested in your product that they want to keep helping you. So they'll do a discovery interview with you. Later on, they'll test your crummy prototype. Later on, they'll beta test your prototype and take it home, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to establish a relationship and keep asking people. So Sean is saying that you need the 40% to discover if you have product market fit. And that's at the bottom of the pyramid, right? That's the basics you need. And then you get to how do we position ourselves better? How do the numbers add up? What's the economics look like? What are the margins? How do we optimize? How do we grow? And everyone talks about growth hacking, Like, you're at the top of the pyramid. Are you sure? Like, are you sure you have good product market fit to begin with? And I think that's the really crux of this idea that most startups don't have the foundation. You can't grow something that was never a good fit to begin with. So that's a really important metric. In terms of ending the interviews, this is a really good question to ask, is what should I have asked you but I didn't ask you? Because sometimes we are not aware enough about a situation, about a demographic, about a lifestyle, to ask the right questions. And if the person by the end of your conversation realizes what you're asking, what you're getting at, what type of information you want, when you give them this opportunity, they'll realize, oh, hey, maybe if I tell you about this other time I used to order this meal prep box and why I stopped ordering it, and all that was because it was too expensive. Now I'm talking to you about pricing, and maybe you hadn't asked me about pricing before. In my sample script, by the way, you guys, you will see pricing question, and you'll see 3 pricing questions. It is not there for you to just pick one of them. All 3 are important, and I'll mention why. 1 asks what's an acceptable price, like what are you okay paying? And that's usually the person giving you a lowball answer and giving you a really low number. The next level, once they give you a number for that, the next level is what is an expensive price you would pay? And that has to do with really the price point that they are comfortable paying. So when I say what's acceptable, they'll say $10. When I'll say what's expensive, they'll say 15. And chances are they're more likely to pay as much as 15. The last question is to kind of see where your ceiling is at, which is at what point would it become too expensive for you to consider? And that's when you know, like, don't go above that. So keep all 3 questions. But anyway, in addition to that, at the end, ask this open-ended one, and then ask to talk to someone else. Ask them to refer you, because finding people to talk to is not easy by any means. And finding others through someone you're interviewing is a really easy way of doing that. I know you have seen this quote so many times. I need to bring it up again, right? Because we're talking about interviews. We're talking about listening to what people are saying. And I keep saying, listen and ask and listen and ask. But the truth is you're not taking things literally. Because just like Nessa said, if they don't know such a thing about a mouse, or they don't know such a thing as having a music on the device that you can walk around and listen to, a walking man, what those people realized from those interviews was that people wanted to get there faster, or they wanted music they could walk around listening to, and not just at home, right? So they listened to the need underneath, which was going fast or having portable music, and not give me faster horses. And I'll end with one of my all-time favorite quotes, which is, your most unhappy customers are your greatest source of learning. So it's very hard to get the bad feedback. It's very hard to talk to the churned users or people who don't like you or have left or canceled or returned your product. It's very hard to sit there and spend another 40 minutes talking to someone who just gave you a middle finger. But listening to them is what enabled NeoSensory to pivot. We ended up raising 10 more million after we used the other 2 for R&D, and the product shipped earlier this year. So it's worth it, you guys. The discovery research definitely pays off. This is our first, this is the first user who tested a prototype. And when we literally just used my phone and went to his house and asked him to do a testimonial. So this isn't scripted or anything. He was just talking. I mean, he was signing. We have an interpreter who typed it up. But do you see his face? Like, this is real. And this guy is wearing something, it's hard to see in the picture, that is this big, that has wires sticking out of it, that has Velcro, like the sticky thing. And it's not a real product. It's like a very, very early stage prototype. And he's just happy with the prototype. And that came after the middle finger. Like, I really want you guys to see that success stories have a deep and dark past because they have figured out how to get out of that. And that's what took them here. The last two slides are recommendations of my favorite books in this space generally, to think about startups or to think about habits and how to build habit forming products. Highly